Hi, everyone. My name is Vladimir Jutsic. We are watching all the news happening in the United States and around the world. And for the next hour, I will be guiding you through that news with our team of correspondents and reporters that are based all over the country and around the world. So stick around for a really interesting hour of news. We're going to begin, though, with this deadly weather that is sweeping the country, leaving a trail of devastation behind. We're tracking the recovery efforts and where the system is moving next. Plus, the U.S. prepares for peace talks with Russia as Ukraine's president warns the Kremlin cannot be trusted. They're not even involved in these discussions. What we know about the upcoming high-stakes meetings and where Ukraine actually fits into the big picture. And it is a big deal for the small screen why several channels owned by Paramount, including CBS and Comedy Central, are staying put on a popular streaming service. This is CBS News 24/7. Right now, search and rescue efforts are taking place in Kentucky after a powerful storm swept through the state, causing major flooding and killed at least 9 people. That death toll is expected to tragically rise. The good news for some is that crews have already performed more than 1,000 rescues. President Trump has approved a disaster declaration for the state. Thousands of people are without power. Kentucky's Governor Andy Beshear joined CBS Mornings earlier to discuss the state's main concerns at the moment.
Some people who can't get out of their neighborhoods, we need to make sure we get them to safety. It means any additional nursing homes. We've already evacuated 2 where people need to be safe. Making sure people are going to have a dry place to stay for the next couple of days as they dig out. And then it'll be turning to the rebuilding effort. But we are still in an emergency situation here in Kentucky. Definitely concerned about our power outages because it's going to get really, really cold. So in many ways, this is one of the biggest flooding events we've had in some areas just since 2022.
CBS News national reporter Karen Hua is joining me now from Bowling Green, Kentucky, to describe what she is seeing on the ground there. So Karen, what have you seen over the last couple of hours?
Well, good morning, Vlad. Yeah, it may seem like I'm standing in a river right now, but this is actually a road in a park that leads to several bike paths and walkways. The water where I'm standing very carefully right now is about up to my knees, but you can see it gets much, much deeper further back there. There also are several structures in this park that have already been submerged by water. I want to turn your attention to that information stand right there. That's at least half underwater right there. And speaking of the snow, you can see a light dusting of white on the roof of that information center right there. The snow's been going on and off throughout the night. The nearby Barron River, the National Weather Service confirms that's still in moderate flooding stage.
So Karen, what are we learning about the folks who have tragically lost their lives in this dangerous weather?
Well, Governor Andy Beshear certainly confirmed to our team this morning at least 9 people have died across the state, but he believes 2 more lives have been lost. As you mentioned earlier, more than 1,000 rescues have been done since Saturday, but the state is still in search and rescue mode today, which means unfortunately, more deaths are expected to come. Officials are saying most of these deaths are due to people who are driving through water that is very fast-paced. We know a mother and her 7-year-old child, they unfortunately took a wrong turn onto this compromised bridge, and that's where their car was unfortunately submerged. We know in Atlanta, outside of Kentucky, another man unfortunately passed away when a tree fell onto his home, so several tragedies here in Kentucky. Governor Beshear is saying that this is one of the worst weather events to hit the state in about 10 years.
It is so absolutely heartbreaking to hear about any deaths, but certainly a young child at just the beginning stages of his life. Horrible, horrible. What are officials telling you, Karen, about the concerns going forward?
Well, of course, the cold weather is very much a concern. A lot of this flash flooding, it's all over right now, but some rivers have yet to crest, which means they haven't reached their highest level yet. It means out in East Kentucky, some of this flooding might continue for today. Again, the state is in search and rescue recovery mode. As the temperatures get colder, and we're expecting several inches of snow coming on Tuesday night, More than 300 roads like this are flooded, so officials are, of course, concerned that they could freeze over with this snow and cold to come. Also thinking about power outages. If it's a lot colder, it makes it a lot more difficult for crews to restore electricity to some 20,000 Kentuckians who are still without it. And, of course, with these frigid temperatures, being without power is certainly a dangerous thing as well.
Yeah, and Karen, just in the minutes that you've been on the air with us, Governor Andy Beshear has now confirmed that 11 people have lost their lives due to this dangerous weather. Thank you very much for your reporting. Stay safe, you and your crew. Thank you. All right, let's bring in CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Sousa with the first look at the national forecast. Hi, Tammy.
Well, hello, Vlad. Yeah, let's take a look at what's going on. First, let's hit the maps on the floor, and you can see exactly where we're talking about. This is where the flooding is. I've actually highlighted Lexington. We have a couple of things we're going to be watching very closely. First off, we have all of these winter alerts that are going into effect now, and this is for tomorrow night. Now, look at this. This stretches from the West Coast to the East Coast, but it does affect everybody that is in Kentucky. Why? Well, take a look at what's going to be on the way. This is a fairly substantial winter storm that is going to be moving through the area, and this is going to bring snow just to those areas where they don't need it. It starts on the West Coast, it dips down to the south, picks up moisture, heads right on through the Tennessee Valley and up the eastern seaboard. So this is going to be a wee bit of a mess for them to deal with. That on top of the fact that they have got to deal with the cold, the bitter cold that is going to be out there. We have a cold snap on the way. Take a look at the numbers right now. This is current numbers. It is 18 below in International Falls. It is 4 in Chicago. That lobe of cold air is going to be sliding in. We already have cold alerts in a place, and they are going to slide eastward. So the mid portion of the country already under cold alerts to go well below average, and this is just going to slide toward the East Coast. We'll talk more about this and the winter storm and the wind that's whipping the Northeast when I come back in a few minutes. Vlad?
All right, Tammy, thank you very much. Appreciate it. Consumers are feeling the pressure at the grocery store as bird flu has caused egg prices to skyrocket. National Economic Council Director Kevin Hassett joined Face the Nation and shared the Trump administration's plan to tackle this.
What we need to do is have better ways with biosecurity and medication and so on to make sure that the perimeter doesn't have to kill the chickens. We have a better, smarter perimeter. And so having a smart perimeter is what we're working on, and we're finalizing the ideas about how to do that with the best scientists in government.
All right, I want to bring in CBS News White House reporter Willie James Inman, who is joining me now from West Palm Beach, Florida. So, Willie James, let's talk about this bird flu and whether or not it's a priority for the White House vis-a-vis the cost of eggs now at the grocery store. What are they doing to try and bring down those prices? Because one of the things that President Trump campaigned on was the fact that he and he alone could bring down prices of everything in America on day one.
Yeah, that's right, Vlad. And our CBS polling tells us that Americans feel that the White House isn't doing enough to lower those prices, although they do feel that the president is doing what he said he would do on the campaign trail. But the White House is looking to make this a priority, and Hassett touched on this a little bit. He talked about biosecurity, and that would reportedly include a vaccine for flocks of birds, chickens in this case, poultry, to make sure that they're vaccinated, to set up that perimeter, that smart perimeter he talked about there on Face the Nation, because USDA policy is to essentially what's called cull a flock of birds when they detect that bird flu is within the chickens there in that flock. So certainly that is something that would drive up the prices of eggs, that would drive up the prices of chicken across the board. And President Trump alluded to that yesterday when he spoke to reporters here in West Palm Beach at the airport. He talked about how inflation was already high when he took office. And he also touched on a few different other topics, but inflation really has been something that he has said that he would bring down, as you mentioned, on day one. So this looks to be a priority for the administration, but we'll have to wait and see whether or not the USDA changes its policy.
So let me ask you about what's going on at the FAA today, Willie James, and that is part of Elon Musk's Doge team will visit the command center there. What is the White House and Doge's vision for the FAA moving forward?
Yeah, well, it is widely known amongst aviation enthusiasts and people who follow the industry closely that the FAA and air traffic controllers are using some outdated, antiquated equipment. And one of the things that they're going to get their hands on and get to see, DOGE, I should mention, in terms of what they're going to get to see today, they're going to talk to some of the air traffic controllers there and also learn about what the controllers like and dislike about the tools that they're using. This, of course, comes following that deadly crash that killed 67 people, that collision, that mid-air collision just before the runway there at DCA at Reagan National Airport. DOGE has been really on a cost-cutting mission led by Elon Musk, the billionaire and close advisor to President Trump. But at least in terms of this instance, they're going to look in, perhaps see what technology, see how things can improve. But they are going to need Congress's buy-in, Vlad, because it's important to point out that they will need millions, if not billions, to improve that outdated system.
And finally, Willie James, let me ask you about this. In addition to all the other things that we're tracking in the first couple of months of this administration, the Trump administration has backtracked on the firings of hundreds of nuclear weapons program workers that he and the administration just laid off. What happened here? How did people who are responsible for these decisions miss the fact that these workers are crucial to our national security?
Yeah, part of the reason perhaps is because these firings were directed outside of the agency. We know, based on our own reporting, reporting from CBS News and the reporting from the Associated Press, that about 350 employees were let go from the National Nuclear Security Administration. As you mentioned, they oversee nuclear weapons, nuclear waste, and then that order was rescinded in a letter, only letting go all, not bringing back, I should say, working to bring back all of those employees, but a statement later went out saying that less than 50 employees were ultimately let go. So this is a backtrack, so to speak. Elon Musk mentioned that mistakes perhaps could be made, and when he gave a remarks in the Oval Office with President Trump last week, and this certainly looks like one of those mistakes, or appears to be one of those mistakes that the administration made, because these workers are really key to not only making sure that our nuclear weapons run the way they should, but making sure that nuclear waste goes where it needs to go as well. So clearly, this is something that the administration is looking to backtrack on. But I'll point out, reportedly, and according to our own reporting, that this decision did not come from within the agency itself. It came from outside of the agency, as much of these decisions are. When you look at agencies like the CDC, that has also affected some 1,300 workers let go there. So clearly, this is a backtrack of sorts for DOGE and those cost-cutting efforts, Vlad.
Yeah, and when you have somebody like Elon Musk suggesting that mistakes are going to happen, and then in the next sentence, they say that their job is to get into these agencies and quote-unquote break things. It's all good and well when it's on X, but we're talking about nuclear weapons here. It's really disturbing. Willie James Inman, thank you very much, my friend. Appreciate it. All right, the Trump administration is asking the Supreme Court to allow the firing of the head of the federal agency dedicated to protecting whistleblowers. A lower court had previously blocked the move. Let's bring in CBS News Department of Justice reporter Jake Rosen to talk more about this. So, Jake, what is the Office of the Special Counsel for our viewers to understand, and why is the administration targeting it?
Well, this is not like the special counsels that we've heard for the last 2 years who investigated President Donald Trump. This is a different office that's more permanent at in the government, which basically oversees the potentially illegal firings of workers and protects them and protects whistleblowers, and also enforces Hatch Act violations if someone were to make political speech while they're in their official capacity for office. You can see why the Trump administration would want to get rid of someone like this, who especially was appointed under President Biden, because of the quick pace that you and Willie just discussed of firing federal workers and clearing out entire departments of the government if Elon Musk gets his way after some of these court decisions are played out. But this person, Hampton Dellinger, has sued to get his job back. He is currently back in the post, and the Trump administration has listened so far to the judge. However, we'll see what the Supreme Court decides in terms of what potential presidential and executive branch power Donald Trump can use to fire some of these independent workers.
You know, Senator Jamie Raskin, Jake, has said that the Department of Justice made a deeply corrupt bargain in its decision to drop charges against New York City Mayor Eric Adams. I want to play a little bit of what he said on Face the Nation yesterday.
This is an outrageous violation of the rules of prosecutors and an offense against due process, and a very dangerous first move for the Department of Justice to be making under the Trump people.
So, Jake, what are you hearing at the DOJ about these resignations that this decision prompted here in New York, for example, at the Southern District?
Well, morale was already low when Donald Trump came in, and new Attorney General Pam Bondi announced she was going to conduct a weaponization investigation basically across the government to go after whether it's just the FBI agents who investigated January 6th and see what they did wrong allegedly, or to go after people like Letitia James, Alvin Bragg, Jack Smith, all of those investigations against Donald Trump. The Department of Justice is usually completely independent from the executive branch. At least there's no discussion of ongoing casework. Obviously, in this case with Mayor Adams, that's not the case. We've seen the Trump administration basically hang these charges over Mayor Adams, and morale is low because if they can do this with someone to get him to cooperate with their immigration policies and want him to work with them on these mass deportation efforts, everyone and all these prosecutors will have to be careful about what cases they do going forward, but also what past cases may be forgiven in exchange for potential political favor.
All right, Jake Rosen with that deep reporting analysis for us. Jake, thank you, my friend. Appreciate it. Okay, the Trump administration is forging ahead to end the war between Russia and Ukraine. The Secretary of State, Marco Rubio, is leading a U.S. delegation to Saudi Arabia to hold talks with Russia tomorrow. Meanwhile, leaders in Europe are having an emergency meeting in Paris. CBS News Middle East reporter Courtney Keeley joins me in Studio 55 to talk more about this. Courtney, thanks so much for being here. So let's talk about this emergency meeting that's happening in Paris right now. What do you know?
Well, we are seeing all the European leaders meet. Now, they're not really included in these Russian-American talks set in Saudi Arabia, so it's interesting. They're only having their separate meeting. It was an emergency summit arranged by the French and Emmanuel Macron. The Brits, who are not part of the EU, are part of it, and the Brits are making news because they said they'll be willing to put ground troops on the ground for peacekeeping. The Swedes said that they would think about that too. They would be open to it. Germany as well. Poland, who's also part of these talks, said they would help with logistical and physical support, but not troops in terms of peacekeeping. So you're seeing Europe wake up to the fact that they're not being included and that they have to worry about their own peace and security. So they're having this meeting to discuss also financing. They're depleted in terms of weaponry and arms after these 3 years. So is the U.S. on certain levels like ammunition. So you're also seeing the Secretary General of NATO in this meeting as well.
It's not just these European leaders that are holding this meeting in Paris because they've been left out of these negotiations. From what I understand, Ukraine's not involved in the discussions that are happening between the United States and Russia. So how does that fit into all of this? And what does it mean, just in talking to your sources on the ground, for the future of Europe? If Russia can invade a country, a sovereign country, make territorial gains, and then have the United States say, you know what, you can keep those gains without conceding anything. In fact, we understand the United States is going to be lifting sanctions. So as former NSA Director John Bolton said last week, they must be drinking, I'm quoting him, Russia must be drinking, the Kremlin, vodka straight from the bottle in celebration because there's been nothing that they've had to do in return for what the United States is asking. So how does Europe feel about this going forward?
Right, they're not making Russia hurt for invading Ukraine. There's no hurt there. There's no pain point. And usually in negotiations, you have pain points. Now, Russia, there is something that people don't really realize is Russia lost a port in Syria when Assad went. That's a really important maritime port, Tartus. They have a port in Crimea. These things just don't come out of taking land. It's because that port in Sevastopol is really important and has been to the Russians since the 1700s. So there should be a pain point against that in terms of negotiations. Do you want to keep your maritime port or anything like that? But what we're seeing really is a gesture of goodwill between the presidents, a Russian and American, and then now you have the U.S. Secretary of State and the Foreign Minister, Sergei Lavrov, also having this meeting, which the Kremlin says is about establishing American and Russian relations. But that looks like a lot of glad-handing. It looks like, toasting with vodka. It does not look like anything happening where they're adversaries or in any way. And it's starting to look like if you have Paris here and Saudi Arabia here, and you've got the Europeans here and the U.S. and Russians here with the Saudis, it's starting to really be tilted because Volodymyr Zelensky is in the UAE. He's going to Saudi on Wednesday, but not for the talks.
So I can understand Crimea. But the question will become what when Pete Hegseth, the defense secretary, and Marco Rubio say that the Ukraine can't expect to look like it did before 2014. I can understand the Crimea situation. I would be, if I'm Belarus or if I'm Poland, which is a NATO member, I'm still worried because what are the repercussions for the Russians invading anyone if the United States is just going to say, all right, let's just end this now? It just is striking to me that Ukraine would not be involved in these discussions, and ultimately whatever's decided, they're going to have to sit and take it.
Right, and you have all of Europe on high alert. That's why they're in Paris. It's not just Poland where we saw the influx of the exodus of refugees coming out during the invasion. It's not Belarus that really is dominated by Putin, and one could say it's not an independent governing country. They're all at the whim of Russia, like we saw during the invasion, which was horrific and deadly, and now you're seeing them at the whim of Russia and America potentially, or at least not talking. So they need to get to the table for it to look somehow balanced.
Courtney, great to have you in studio. Thank you very much for your reporting. Appreciate it. All right, we've just learned that Pope Francis's hospital stay will be extended. The latest on his health and what he's reportedly doing today. Next, you're watching CBS News 24/7. Secretary of State Marco Rubio, as we indicated earlier, is in Saudi Arabia this morning. He is expected to lead talks between a U.S. delegation and Russian officials tomorrow with the focus on ending the war in Ukraine. Secretary Rubio arrived from Israel, where he met with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu during a joint press conference yesterday. Netanyahu vowed, quote, the gates of hell will be open if Hamas does not release all of its hostages. Speaking on Face the Nation, Rubio said the U.S. and Israel were working closely to get the rest of those hostages out.
So we coordinate and work very close with them. We share the goal that every hostage needs to come home, every single one, without delay. Obviously, there are details of how we're pursuing that and coordinating that we're not going to share publicly because we don't want to endanger the hostages and we don't want to endanger this process.
All right, for more on the situation in the Middle East, I'm joined by CBS News foreign correspondent Chris Livesay, who's reporting from Tel Aviv this morning. All right, Chris, let's talk about this trip to Saudi Arabia. What are you hearing about that with vis-a-vis Secretary Rubio's trip?
Hey there, Vlad. Well, yeah, he's expected to talk about Donald Trump's stunning plan that he announced last week to resettle the Gaza Strip, moving the 2 million Palestinians who live there right now among the rubble. Where to exactly, we don't exactly know. This trip to Saudi Arabia, as you mentioned, comes hot off the heels of his visit with Prime Minister Benjamin Netanyahu in Israel. Both of them championed the deal from Donald Trump, calling it bold and courageous. But remember that Marco Rubio has previously said that the idea from Donald Trump was also aimed at pressuring Arab countries to come up with alternatives. So Arab countries perhaps like Saudi Arabia, where he is today, and the next stop on his trip is the United Arab Emirates, two Arab powerhouses who have a lot of sway when it comes to Gaza and the Middle East at large.
Yeah, and Chris, just briefly on that, the president of the United States has doubled down on his plan to displace 2 million Gazans in place of building luxury oceanfront properties. I wonder what that would mean to the fragile peace that has existed between Saudi Arabia and Israel from the Abraham Accords, but even older peace treaties that have been signed, for example, by Egypt, of course, talking about the historic Camp David Accords. How would those countries feel about what the president is suggesting?
Well, who knows, because where exactly are the Palestinians supposed to go? That's very unclear. Egypt is outspoken against it. They have a very fragile balance with, let me say, a group that's adjacent to Hamas, at least as they see it, the Muslim Brotherhood. If they saw Palestinians coming into, let's say, the Sinai Peninsula, just on the other side of the border with Gaza, they could see that. They say they would see that as very disruptive to their own domestic security. It's a very fragile, authoritarian country, and so they're adamantly opposed to upsetting that balance. Jordan is similar. That's another country that's sort of been floated out there as a country that might be in a position to take on some of these Palestinian refugees. But, that's a country that's already hosting millions and millions of refugees from Iraq, and from Syria. So it doesn't exactly have the infrastructure to host even more people. And if you talk to people on the ground in Gaza, many will say that they don't want to leave. Of course, many perhaps would love to leave, but they can't right now because of the conditions of the war and because Hamas doesn't want to let them leave. It's extremely complicated and extremely fragile.
Glad that you are here with us this morning to break it all down for us. Chris Livesay in Tel Aviv. Thank you, my friend. All right, a new round of government workers could soon be on the pink slip list. Which agencies are to be targeted? That's coming up next. You're watching CBS News 24/7. Here's a look at some of the top stories we're following for you this morning. A trip to the hospital forced Shakira to cancel her concert in Lima, Peru last night. The singer said she had to go to the emergency room for an abdominal issue and that doctors told her she could not perform. She says she hopes to recover and be back on stage soon. Shakira told fans her team is already working on a new date. Staying in South America, lawyers in Argentina filed fraud complaints against the country's president after he promoted a crypto coin on his social media. President Javier Milei deleted the post a few hours later, and the value of the Libra currency collapsed, causing millions of dollars in losses to investors. Milei denied involvement in the coin's development and said he removed the post to avoid speculation. YouTube TV reached a deal with Paramount to continue carrying its channels. The agreement comes after a failed round of contract negotiations for their streaming alliance. YouTube TV announced it will continue to offer CBS, CBS Sports, Showtime, and Nickelodeon, among other channels, of course, including CBS News, which is owned by Paramount Global, which offers the streaming service Paramount Plus. All right, the New York Times reports that the IRS is planning to give a team member of DOJ access to sensitive taxpayer data. The service is also facing layoffs of probationary workers right in the middle of tax season as DOJ continues to trim down, or at least attempt to trim down, the federal government. I want to bring in CBS News White House reporter Aaron Navarro. Aaron, I just wonder what Americans are thinking as they're preparing to file their tax returns and they're hearing that those people who are responsible for collecting those returns and the data associated with them may be fired. I mean, are we potentially talking about I can just envision a world where people choose not to file their taxes because there's nobody there, and what that means ultimately for the U.S. economy.
Vlad, the IRS is one of those agencies we're watching to see if there are any cuts. CBS News learned last week that around Thursday that a DOJ staffer was at the IRS, and obviously you mentioned the reports this morning about wanting to gain access to what's known as the Integrated Data Retrieval System, the IDRS, which essentially houses a lot of personal taxpayer information. In reaction to the news, you've seen watchdog groups voice a lot of concerns with whether their personal data, the personal data of taxpayers, people filing their returns, could potentially get out there in some way, just given the kind of lack of guardrails potentially for a DOJ staffer. The White House has told outlets that this DOJ staffer was granted or was acting, quote, legally and with the appropriate security clearances. One official also posted, quote, the hysteria surrounding DOJ's access to data is akin to a patient crying foul when a doctor asks for their medical history. So they're downplaying this, but certainly watchdog groups are voicing a lot of concerns about the potential access that they could get to the IRS.
And what could be next in the line of sight for DOJ?
We're obviously watching the IRS, and it's important to note a lot of health agencies saw steep cuts for what are known as probationary employees. These are federal government workers that came in maybe within the last year or so. We saw steep cuts at CMS, NIH, CDC, quote, disease detectives were cut as well as some at the HHS. A White House spokesperson said that scientists at CDC and FDA were not part of the cuts, and we'll be watching the Department of Education as well. We started to see some of those cuts last week, and we've heard President Trump talk about how he wants to shut down that agency. That seems to be next in terms of the steeper cuts this upcoming week.
All right, Aaron, thank you very much. Meanwhile, part of the sweeping government cuts includes the Justice Department, which just fired 20 immigration judges. This comes as immigration courts deal with a reported backlog of about 4 million cases. I want to bring in CBS News immigration and politics reporter Camilo Montoya Galvez. All right, Camilo, break down what is happening. This is some news that's just coming into us and what this means for the recently fired hundreds of Department of Immigration employees.
Yes, Vlad, to level set, the Department of Homeland Security over the weekend fired more than 400 employees, many of them at non-immigration related agencies such as the cybersecurity branch at DHS and FEMA, which of course, as you know, Vlad, oversees disaster response. But 50 of the cuts affected employees at U.S. Citizenship and Immigration Services. That is the federal agency that administers and oversees the legal immigration system. And these employees, Vlad, adjudicate applications for asylum, U.S. citizenship, green cards or permanent residency here in the U.S., work permits and other immigration benefits. Again, legal immigration benefits. Importantly, the two DHS agencies overseeing President Trump's dramatic crackdown on illegal immigration, Customs and Border Protection, and U.S. Immigration and Customs Enforcement, ICE, have been spared so far in these mass firings. We'll see if that changes, but that obviously signals that these agencies are really important for the president's immigration plans, mainly that mass deportation operation. Of course, we should know that more than a dozen immigration judges at the Justice Department have also been filed, despite the fact, as you noted, Vlad, that 4 million pending cases right now are being overseen by the immigration court. So these more than a dozen judges have been fired, and there is still a mounting case backlog of millions of people who are waiting to get a decision on their asylum requests or other ways to stop their deportation.
And what are we learning about those migrant detentions at Guantanamo Bay? That's another controversial decision made by this administration.
That's right. A couple weeks ago, Vlad, as you know, President Trump ordered officials to dramatically expand migrant holding capacity at Guantanamo Bay, the naval base there. And so far, we understand, according to U.S. officials, that the Trump administration has sent a dozen military aircraft to Cuba, to that base, to send 150 migrant detainees, all men from Venezuela. We understand that despite what the administration has been saying about many of these migrant detainees being the worst of the worst and gang members and other serious criminals, that some of the detainees being transferred to Cuba, Vlad, are nonviolent, low-risk detainees. What does that mean? Well, these are migrants who are in the country illegally, Vlad, but they lack any serious criminal record or any at all and are just waiting deportation to Venezuela, which, as you know, right now is not accepting U.S. deportation. So it remains very much unclear how long these detainees will remain in Cuba.
Camila, before you go really quickly, and you may not know this off the top of your head, I'm just curious, how many, the rate at which the Trump administration is deporting undocumented migrants and immigrants out of the country, what is that versus what the Biden administration had been doing up until the inauguration? I'm just curious if it's greater, because the President Trump argued the reason that he should be elected is that he would increase those deportations, but I wonder where they are vis-a-vis the last administration.
Sure. So we have to make a distinction between what is happening at the U.S.-Mexico border and in the interior of the country. Because of the very low levels of illegal crossings now at the U.S.-Mexico border, the Trump administration, Vlad, is actually deporting fewer people than the Biden administration at the U.S.-Mexico border. But in the interior, ICE has been ramping up arrests dramatically of unauthorized immigrants, again, saying that they're targeting criminals, but also now they can pick up anyone who is in the country illegally. And so interior arrests and deportations are up, but removals and deportations at the border are down, mainly, again, Vlad, because migration at the border has dropped significantly.
All right, Camilo, really important information. Thank you very much.
Thanks, Vlad.
All right, some researchers in California are concerned about ocean health in the wake of the deadly wildfires. Cleanup continues from those fires, but the focus is shifting to the threat on the ocean. That's because a lot of hazardous material and ash could end up in the water. Some researchers are worried about debris and ash making the water unsafe. So let's bring in CBS News meteorologist Tammy Sousa with another look at the national forecast.
Well, you know what, Vlad? We're looking at a whole lot of weather. The parade of storms is going to continue across the nation. We're also looking at a huge cold snap that's going to be moving in. Once again, we're going to deal with that big Arctic push. Look at the shades of pink and look at the shades of white. They're dipping all the way down to the Gulf Coast, almost to the tip of Florida, and they're moving into the heartland. So everybody has to get ready now for at least another 3, 4, 5 days of extreme cold that is moving through the area. when we talk about cold, we also have to factor in what it means to have that wind chill out there. And the wind chill is going to be brutal at times. We're going to be looking at wind chills that are going to, at times, feel well below zero. Case in point, take a look at some of these wind chills, well below zero today. Once you get into the Dakotas and Minnesota, and then you drop all the way down to Texas, they're looking at brutal wind chills. Over into New York, not so bad. A wind chill maybe 30 degrees, so that's not awful. The only places not dealing with this are right on the water along the Gulf, right along Southern California beaches and in Florida. Here we go for tomorrow. Those wind chills get even worse. Look at that. Double digits below zero. Now we're seeing wind chills into the 20s for New York. Even into Atlanta, we're going to see a little bit of a wind chill starting to form. And then through the mid part of the country, once we get into Wednesday, more cold air just keeps spilling in and then gently sliding to the east. We're also watching our next storm. Look at this, taking shape, coming up the East Coast. So it's going to dive right through the same area that's trying to clean up and where the cold air is. And we have a number of winter storm watches and warnings already issued for that entire area, expecting to see a big swath of snow, up to 6 inches of snow across parts of the country. Vlad?
Oh, boy. All right, Tammy, thank you very much. Coming up. What we know about bird flu and the vaccine that was just granted permission to be used in chickens in the United States. You're streaming CBS News 24/7. This morning, the Vatican says that Pope Francis will remain in the hospital and that his illness is presenting a complex clinical picture. That's a quote. But officials say he slept well overnight and was up reading the newspaper this morning. The 88-year-old pontiff was hospitalized on Friday. It's unclear how long his doctors plan to keep him in the hospital. Meanwhile, a vaccine manufacturer received the green light for its bird flu vaccine to be used in chickens. The Department of Agriculture granted the company Zoetis a conditional license for its existing vaccine, which the company says its scientists have been updating since 2022. While the threat to the public remains low, the outbreak has impacted more than 150 million birds and has driven up the price of eggs dramatically in the last few years since it began. And on this President's Day, we want to take you to North Dakota's Badlands, where the newest presidential library is under construction. It will honor Theodore Roosevelt while also including his complicated legacy. CBS News' Barry Peterson reports.
Medora, population about 150, has claims to fame. Pitchfork steak fondue. Teddy Roosevelt's influence from restaurants to a statue.
He's 5'8". I'm 5'7 3/4.
Joe Wiegand, who plays Teddy in a local play.
I struck him another blow with my left and another blow with my right.
What's your favorite thing about Teddy Roosevelt? His personality is something that's been spoken of as being electric or magnetic, something that inspired others.
And now a $330 million presidential library opening in 2026, overlooking the Badlands that Teddy treasured.
He tested himself physically, mentally, and he proved that he could do it.
Edward O'Keefe wrote a book on Roosevelt and is CEO of the library.
He found America here. He found real people, hardworking people.
But he also mirrored the racism of his times, once saying, "I don't go so far as to think that the only good Indians are the dead Indians, but I believe 9 out of every 10 are."
You tell the story.
You tell the whole story. I don't think that it actually diminishes TR to understand that he made mistakes. You know, he said things that are regrettable.
And Native American exhibits will tell their story about the land they lost.
If we tell the truth, we maybe learn from it.
Mark Fox is chairman of the Mandan, Hidatsa, and Arikara Nation.
Was it sacred? Does it have meaning?
It does. All land is sacred, has meaning. But in particular, that land was very sacred to us as well.
There are lessons from Teddy worth learning today.
What have you learned about him? The glory of work and the joy of living.
That joy is still celebrated in a small town and in the stark land he came to love. Barry Peterson, CBS News, Medora, North Dakota.
I love a good Barry Peterson story. Thank you, Barry. Appreciate it. All right, let's talk Major League Baseball spring training, which is in full swing. We'll take you down to Florida, where some of the biggest teams in baseball are preparing for the upcoming season. You're watching CBS News 24/7.
MLB spring training is underway in Arizona and Florida, and that's where we find our Otis Livingston. He's got all the action from Port St. Lucie.
Spring training 2025. Juan Soto arrived at Mets camp like a rock star in Port St. Lucie, Florida. He is the richest man in professional sports with his 15-year, $765 million contract. Soto is happy he doesn't have to answer any more questions about his future and thinks the Mets have what it takes to win it all. But the Mets have their hands full because the defending World Series champion LA Dodgers have gotten even stronger in the offseason, and they are the favorites to win it all. That shouldn't be a surprise since they are projected to spend a record $500 million on player salaries, benefits, and luxury taxes. The Yankees lost to LA in the World Series, and even though they came up short in the Soto sweepstakes, they recovered to make some key moves. They are the New York Yankees, so they will always be in the conversation. The Yankees are getting ready for the upcoming season at George M. Steinbrenner Field in Tampa, their spring training home. But the Tampa Bay Rays will play their 2025 regular season home games there. The Rays Stadium, Tropicana Field in St. Petersburg, was significantly damaged by Hurricane Milton and will not be available when the team opens the season in late March. They won't be the only team playing at a minor league ballpark. The A's will play at the home of the Giants' AAA team, the Sacramento River Cats. But don't call them the Sacramento A's. The team is officially going as the Athletics as they wait until they can move to their future home in Las Vegas. And finally, Major League Baseball continues to go worldwide. The Dodgers, featuring Shohei Ohtani and starting pitchers Yoshinobu Yamamoto and Roki Sasaki, will face the Chicago Cubs in the first two games of the regular season in the Tokyo Dome, March 18th and 19th. From coast to coast, spring training is in full swing, and so are the dreams of 30 teams. Back to you.
All right, Otis, thank you very much. Let's stay in the world of sports. Last night's NBA All-Star Game in San Francisco featured a new format where global stars, young guns, and longtime NBA veterans faced off. CBS News Bay Area reporter Matt Lively has more.
It was only fitting that an NBA All-Star Game taking place in San Francisco was won by one of the game's greatest champs as Steph Curry and Shaq's OGs claimed victory.
It's not going to look like it used to, but it can still be fun for everybody. And I think I had fun. Our team had fun. I'm not going to complain about being tired or exhausted. This is an honor and a blessing to be able to celebrate and share this beautiful Bay Area that's been a part of my life for the last 16 years.
It's cool Steph got the MVP back here at home, so good weekend overall.
Fans were eager to see all the stars, but guys like Anthony Edwards and LeBron James were late scratches. The new format may be to blame.
You always want to play. But when they put 2 minutes on the clock for warm-up, I ain't get no time to warm up my groin, and it was all bad.
The NBA has been looking for ways to incentivize players, even rewarding the winning players $125,000. But that cash didn't result in a whole lot of extra effort.
It's just up to the guys that handle all that stuff to figure out what's next and how to keep making it more and more interesting, and hopefully we get there one day. But yeah, I'm glad it's not my job to figure that stuff out.
All-Star Sunday was more than just a game. Kevin Hart emceed the event, and the Inside the NBA crew bid farewell after broadcasting their final All-Star event.
Paying homage and giving honor to Kenny, Shaq, Chuck, and Ernie for, them representing the game of basketball in their way for, 3 decades.
The Bay Area acted as a great host, but the NBA now heads south as Los Angeles will take over duties in 2026.
All right, let's wrap up with CBS News Philadelphia meteorologist Tammy Sousa with the final look at the national forecast. Hey, Tammy.
Well, hello, Vlad. I wish I was at spring training anywhere other than the Northeast or the northern tier of states. Here's where we're going to be today. Look at that, single digits and below zero once you get up near the Canadian border. We are looking at cool temperatures all the way down the East Coast. The warmth is down in Florida and along the Gulf Coast and in Southern California. Now, look at what it's going to feel like today. These are the wind chills. Double digits below zero. It is going to feel really brutal everywhere. And speaking of wind, those wind advisories will continue up the eastern seaboard into the Northeast throughout the day today with 40 to 60 mile an hour wind gusts. Vlad?
Tammy, thank you very much. We'll see you tomorrow. That does it for me, folks. But stay right where you are. After the break, Mugo Diwe is live from San Francisco with all the news breaking from coast to coast. This is CBS News 24/7.